It's the first time it's happened since at least Confederation. The border with our U.S. neighbors is closed to all but essential traffic. And that's not all that's transpired in these strange times. Bruce Heyman was the U.S. ambassador to Canada under the previous American administration. He's the author of The Art of Diplomacy, Strengthening the Canada-U.S. Relationship in Times of Uncertainty. And we're pleased to welcome him back to our airwaves, because if these aren't uncertain times, I don't know what are. He joins us from his home in Chicago. And Ambassador, it's good to see you again. How are you managing?
I'm managing fairly well, but I need to extend my condolences to everyone across Canada, not only suffering from this horrific virus, but this act of violence that took place in Nova Scotia. And I know how deeply that impacts not only the people in the province, but across the country. So my condolences to everybody during this difficult time.
Indeed, and thank you for that, Ambassador. Let's just review some of the recent history of the American-Canadian relationship. I'd like to start with what went through your mind when you heard in late March that President Trump was musing about putting U.S. troops near the Canadian-American border because of security concerns at this time.
Well, let's just set some context here. There is no more important relationship for the United States of America than the relationship with Canada. And I say that not in a flippant way, but in an entirely serious way after serving as ambassador, after working across your country and understanding the complexity of the relationship. You are our best trading partner, not always the largest, but best. And we create millions of jobs on both sides of the border. Energy. You are our largest provider of energy of all types that we don't provide for ourselves. Environmentally, we have this shared border, and drinking water here in the Great Lakes at my home for 43 million people on both sides of our border. And then around the world, geopolitically, who's been there for us at every twist and turn, whether taking our diplomats out in Iran, whether when the Iran hostage crisis, at 9/11, being there not only from Gander to Afghanistan, but at the core of NORAD, being there whenever we've been in need. And then yet it's even more profound than that, because we're not just neighbors and trading partners and friends, but more Americans live in Canada than any other country in the world outside the United States, and more Canadians live in the United States. And so when you touch on this point, I want to tell you that the relationship is existential, but what's happened over the last 3 years has really challenged this relationship. When the president went out and started taxing steel and aluminum in Canada as a threat to national security, when the language coming out of the White House attacking the prime minister, then foreign minister, during the NAFTA negotiations and threatening your auto industry with tariffs. Then, of course, he threatened troops at the border, and then he goes off and does this thing with the mask. All of this combined is about a man who thinks in what I think are binary terms. So if he wants America to win, or if he wants to win personally, he thinks someone has to lose. Where historically the U.S.-Canada relationship was based on win-win outcomes. Yes, we have different perspectives. We don't always see things through the exact same lens, but never was there a threat to the relationship, just like a spouse or a partner or a friend or a business colleague, that you can see things differently. But the relationship has to withstand all of that. And unfortunately, he is challenging it.
Well, I will say, for a former ambassador, you have been nothing but blunt spoken over the years as to what you think of the current incumbent in the White House. And I'll just read a recent tweet of yours. This was from April 8th, in which you said, "I've had a lot of conversations today with Canadians, and it is abundantly clear Donald Trump has done more damage to the Canada-U.S. relationship than any other single person." Having said that, Ambassador, I want to get your views on whether we've been here before. John F. Kennedy couldn't stand John Diefenbaker, and Richard Nixon couldn't stand the current Prime Minister's father. So have we, in effect, been here before?
No, you can have personality differences. You can have policy differences, but you don't go out and threat the existential life of the economy through your autos, through your steel and aluminum. You don't say, I'm going to put troops up next to the border of your best friend and ally. You don't go out and withhold life-saving equipment in the time of a virus and not understanding the complexity of nurses coming into Windsor or materials being used to make the mask. I would say that, yep, there have been personality differences along the way. And look, I had my own differences when I was dealing with the Keystone Pipeline and the issues that came up with that. But never, ever was this relationship challenged in the way this president has now done this over the last 3 years.
Well, I was going to say, it wasn't all beer and Skittles when Barack Obama and Justin Trudeau were having their bromance. They still disagreed on softwood lumber. They still disagreed
Correct.
on Keystone XL. So what's different now?
What's different now is that we look through a lens of a relationship and partner where we can go across the table and say, I see things differently. This is in our interest. This is in your interest, and trying to find paths for positive outcomes. And even with all of that, first state dinner in more than 20 years, working on Paris climate change between the Obama and Trudeau governments, working on reduction of drilling in the Arctic and those kinds of things, enhancing pre-clearance and pre-clearance agreements, and expanding the ability for Canadians and Americans to travel easily across our border. We worked on a lot of things that got things done, even though we had differences. The president, unfortunately, is siloed in his beliefs, and he has created adversaries out of allies, not only with Canada, but throughout the world.
I think it's fair to say that most Canadians are pretty up on what's going on with the daily briefings of Prime Minister Trudeau or with Premier Ford here in Ontario. They may be less aware of some of the leaders who you believe have really come to the fore in the United States. Are there governors in particular, maybe even governors who are sort of bordered with Ontario, that you think we ought to be paying attention to right now because they've done a good job lately?
The answer is yes, and let's think about this a minute. But before we get to the governors, there have been no better leaders in this country than the leaders in the medical community. Whether they're doctors, whether they're hospital administrators, whether they work for the CDC or the NIH, whether they are nurses at the front line or emergency service personnel. These people are our leaders right now. And we, in the political side, need to listen to them and understand this battle and fight. The president has lacked the ability to take the lead on getting the proper equipment, getting the proper testing, developing a standard on a national basis. And thus, he's left it up to the governors to do that. So governors individually started operating and standing out, whether it was high-profile governors like Governor Cuomo or Governor Murphy in New Jersey, or Governor Pritzker here, or Governor in Illinois, or Governor Newsom in California. But something else has now developed. And what has developed is these governors now have regional alliances that have come together. And I think this is a profound change of what's taken place. So you have Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, and Rhode Island, and others coming together. You have 7 governors in the Midwest coming together. These are Republican and Democrats coming together, working to deal with the challenges. You have the whole West Coast. You have the South working together. These alliances, I think, will survive past this virus and create new ways of working together. And I think this is a positive looking forward into the future, but it definitely diminishes the value of the national presence of the president.
Which governors have disappointed you?
So, look, there are some governors out there that are actually, unfortunately, not listening to the medical community as effectively. And thus, they're not taking as seriously the virus in and of itself. And so their behaviors are either ignoring the warnings that are coming out or just blatantly going against them. So when you have a governor who allows people going out to the beaches in large communities or opening up their states in ways that I think put people at risk. Look, we've seen in South Dakota, the governor who is not admitting that the virus is having a significant impact and is not having people stay at home. Yet we've now lost one of our largest pork production plants because of the virus spreading all through it. And so, it's disappointing to see some of these folks who are following the more political route than the scientific medical route.
So I gather Georgia and Florida are not at the top of your Christmas card list right now.
I think that they could have done a significantly better job and should be listening to the medical community. And I think even as extreme as the president has been, he is now telling the Georgia governor, maybe you should pull that back a little bit. Tattoo parlors and beauty salons and bowling alleys and all of this, that I think is just, we're a little too early and a bridge too far to commit yourself to that. And so, and then of course I heard the mayor of Las Vegas talking about, opening the casinos and the way she did the other day on television in an interview. Look, this is disappointing that they're not taking this as seriously. But that's not the majority of the country. And the majority of the country is doing, I think, a good job at focusing on this in the right way.
Yeah, I guess what surprised me is this has been a pretty nonpartisan pandemic in as much as I saw some polling the other day, which said basically 97% of people who lean Democrat, which is the party that you belong to, they believe the health officials and they are online with all of the social distancing measures that we've had to take. But even 80% of Republicans are there as well, even with their built-in suspicion of some institutions and their appreciation of whatever President Trump has brought to bear. What do you make of those kinds of numbers?
The virus is not from a political party. The damage that the virus is causing in terms of sickness and unfortunate mortality is not divided by political party. And I think that the realities of the virus spread have changed the language and dynamic. Look, it wasn't that long ago that the president was declaring this a Democratic hoax. And he was standing up and really dismissing the advice of the medical community, but turning it into a political battle. And I think it started off that way. And I think there's still remnants of that in some of these governors or mayors who have listened to the Republican at that time. But I think there's a new recognition now with facing the facts of this horrific virus and the outcomes that it's generating. I think it's bringing people across party lines together. Families may be of different parts, but when you lose a family member, it brings everyone together.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Heyman, I want to ask you about this relatively recent phenomenon where people have been protesting in the streets of states like Minnesota and Michigan, waving flags and basically saying, we've had enough. We want to get back to work. What do you make of those kinds of demonstrations?
So first of all, being inside for the number of weeks we have, I can understand the frustration and cabin fever people feel just on that alone, but also people whose livelihoods have been threatened. We have between 25 and 30 million people who have lost their jobs and filing for unemployment, and a larger number of people who have been furloughed or have had hours cut. And people are scared and they're having a difficult time making ends meet and they want to just get back to work. And I don't blame them. And the challenge is, how do we find that balance? The balance between lives and livelihood. There are people, though, that are promoting those people to come out and protest. And it happened from the White House when he sent tweets out talking about liberate Michigan. What in the world is he doing or thinking? But there's some evidence that there are groups that are more radical in our country that are financing, this movement of creating these protests. It's very dangerous. They're putting their own lives at risk, but they're putting their families' lives, their neighbors' lives, their communities' lives at risk. And they don't fully appreciate this. And I just hope to God that there's no violence that comes from it and there's no virus spread with this group, because that would just have a very difficult outcome for those communities.
Well, Ambassador, I should follow up by asking you about, for example, Detroit. It's a very heavily African-American population there, and you see people in the streets waving, for example, Confederate flags. How worried are you that could turn not just unpleasant, but violent as well?
Look, you always have to worry about these things potentially turning violent, but I hope calmer heads prevail. I totally understand when people are getting frustrated wanting to get out of their house and get back to work. Millions of people have lost their jobs across the United States. It's, people want to find a way to just get out and get their life back. Unfortunately, this virus is larger than that, and lives take precedent over livelihood at this moment. And we're going to find a path to get there. But I wonder who's financing this and who's pushing these groups to do this. And I think that it's a very dangerous path to go down. And the hostility of what a Confederate flag stands for, many capitals have taken those down. We've removed them from many areas of our country. But you definitely, stokes emotions and history in our country. And I think it's highly inappropriate to be doing that. If you want to support the president, you want to get out and work, and you want to have a voice, and you want to do this in a way where they're not getting people sick, not getting themselves in danger, and not getting their family members or the community in danger, fine. But what they're doing is, I think, crossing the line in terms of threatening our communities, creating potential virus spread, and then using these symbols that are so hostile and have a very negative part of our history of our country. And especially doing that, waving that in an area where we have a significant Black population, I think is particularly offensive. Some of it's being financed by outside parties who want to see this happen. The president recognizes there are a handful of states. His party recognizes there are a handful of states that are deemed swing states, states that he won that caused him to be the president versus Hillary Clinton. And he's looking at polling and he's looking at those, and it's not looking good for him at this moment. And so I think he's trying to change the dynamic, but it's a very dangerous path that some people are going down.
Well, as long as you've opened up the door to a little political chat, let me go through it with you. Joe Biden is the nominee of your party, or the presumptive nominee of your party.
Presumptive, yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Biden's 78. He's looked better lately than he did, say, 6 months ago when he first was a contender for the job. But it's a long way between now and November. A lot can go wrong. What are you concerned about as it relates to his candidacy?
So I'm not concerned on his candidacy side. I'm more concerned about the nefarious activities that have taken place and continue to take place on the other side. The suppression of voting, removing people from the voting rolls, changing the rules of how votes can and can't take place. And if we are still in this virus lockdown or stay in place situation as we approach the fall and winter flu seasons in the United States and in North America again, will he do something that changes the voting that takes place? And he's suppressing vote by mail. So all of these things concern me deeply. I'm not overly concerned about what the vice president will do, but the president, I think, has demonstrated, disregard for legal standards. And I think that he will be in the fight for his political life this fall. And, I worry about crossing the line.
We've got 30 seconds left here. Can I ask you just finally, is there anything that makes you happy or hopeful nowadays?
So a lot of things. And I think we're going to come out of the back end of this with profound changes that are going to lead us for the next century. And the innovation and creativity and ways of working and things that we're going to do that will come out of this will be very good for us and very optimistic. But we're still in the middle of the storm right now, and it's hard sometimes. It's darkest before the dawn, and the dawn will come, and we will have better days ahead.
We are happy to remind people that you are the author of The Art of Diplomacy, Strengthening the Canada-U.S. Relationship in Times of Uncertainty. Ambassador Bruce Heyman, we're always grateful when you spare some time for us on TVO. Thanks so much, and good healthy wishes to you and yours.
And to you and to all my friends in Canada, be healthy.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.